You ready to get going?
Yes.
All right. So this is the first recording from new location.
Yes. New location where we hope we have a bit more room to podcast and do some other fun things.
This is like Site B. Still in the process of selling place A.
Mm-hmm. Any prayerful people out there? If you keep that in your prayers, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, quite a bit. Because it's a little bit nerve-wracking.
Yep. And we're tired people.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever been this tired in my life.
Really? Ever? Wow.
It's like it doesn't go away. It's weird.
Yeah. With the two different places, that's probably part of it too. Even if we're not like cleaning or doing work at the first house, place A.
Yeah.
It's still like a thing that's out there that your brain can't, my brain can't calm down about.
I know for me, in particular, like vacations are a good example. Even when you do a good thing or when you do a nice thing like a vacation,
Mm-hmm.
I always need like a day to settle back in after I'm said and done before I transition back to work and all of the normal things that you do on a day-to-day basis. So,
And today would mark a complete year. See, I'm tired. A complete full week of living in this other place. So what does that mean? We still haven't settled in.
I know that I haven't,
Yeah.
and I probably won't until I stop seeing boxes. I think every time I turn around and see a box, I get a little overwhelmed.
Something to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a test in faith, though.
How's that?
What background noise just kind of calmed down?
The oven.
Oh. Do we have to start all over again?
No.
We're not doing that. It was interesting timing of like faith that things are going to work out with the other place. Things worked out with this one after we were very prayerful about it. I think we were very prayerful about it because we both had a feeling. We talked about it. We've prayed about it. We prayed before going to look at houses and still stayed with, like, we love our first place that we lived together. And if that was where we were meant to stay, then that made sense in some ways to us. But if we were supposed to move, we were trying to go with the feeling that we both had and check in with God and say, is this correct?
Yeah. I think one of the interesting pieces to that is even outside of the house, right? So you have an inspection done. You make sure that everything is up to snuff, or at least as up to snuff as it's going to be. You know, obviously you scope out the neighborhood to some degree too, but you really can't always control who you're going to live next to or who you're going to live around. And when we were in an apartment, for example, like right after we got married, I felt like the apartment complex that we were in was reasonably safe. But like a year or two into that, it feels like that drastically changed. And we had a lot of people around us that were actually dangerous, right? And so you can't control that, though. It's like once you're in that place, it's like, gosh, you got to move, you got to pick up and move everything. And I feel like when we got into our first house following that, I think a lot of our neighbors really kept to themselves.
Which is the house now that we just moved from.
Right.
Just to clarify.
And
we had a little bit more land than the house we're sitting in, talking in right now. So people are more spaced apart for that reason too.
But I feel like people mostly kept to themselves, and any of the interactions that we had were okay. So I feel like you kind of risk that when you go off somewhere else. And
Mm-hmm.
lo and behold, it seems like we have nice neighbors thus far, which is makes me sleep soundly at night because I always worry about that.
Really kind. So that they're here if we need anything. And then also like have lived here for a couple years before us and in the neighborhood before us and say that they like it here. I like hearing that too, because it's not like, well, we'll move as soon as we can or
Right.
as you're moving in. That's awful to hear, but
It is weird to look around in here though, and it is a very different type of environment. It is like the houses are much less spaced out, and you have less of a yard, but it's nice knowing that there are nice people around. And I know for us, we just had a lot of stuff in our old house that was taking up space. And so I think now in order to like walk around from room to room, you don't have to kind of zig and zag between furniture, which is kind of a nice thing.
yeah, we inherited some furniture too, which is lovely to have.
But takes up a lot of room.
Yep.
So. Well, with that, I'm Ryan.
And I'm Jessie.
And this is our Something About Catholics podcast. And we had toyed around with the idea of doing like a season 1 and season 2. And it does kind of feel fitting that now that we've moved from one location to another, it almost does feel like a new season.
Yeah.
So for whatever it's worth, we'll just call this the beginning of season 2 of our Something About Catholics podcast. And I think we are 9 deep, maybe? Or is this number 10?
So if we put this one out next, it would be number 10.
Wow.
The last one that's up is number 9.
Okay.
So we can either make this the last of season 1 or the start of season 2. Season 2 would make more sense to me because this is a new season of life, as like when I roll my eyes when people say that sometimes.
Yeah. A new season of life. I'll take it. I'll go with it.
But if we do another season, doesn't mean we need to move again.
No. But another big deal in the Catholic Church right now that is going on, and that you could also consider a new season or something that's like largely changed, is the recent passing of Pope Francis, which is
nice drawing that together.
Yeah, I was trying to find that through line.
Yeah,
it just kind of
did
appeared,
a good job.
So I went with it. But yeah, it's I think it's interesting because a lot of the news and current events that I listen to seem to be woven into Catholicism. And there was a lot of discussion from some of the news and social media I tap into that, people thought he was going to pass away about a month ago, when he was very sick.
Yeah.
I'm in the hospital.
He was really sick for a while.
Extremely sick. And I believe he only had one lung, so it was probably very, very difficult to get back to some type of normalcy. But it did look like he was on the mend. And I just remember, like, part of the reason I bring up some of the news that I listen to that kind of weave in and out of Catholicism, the reason that I make that point is who is going to take his place, who's going to be the successor. And nobody really knows for sure, but I think we'd like to get into that a little bit today. I know if there's a number of people that listen to this podcast and have been asking me, and it's just wild how, once again, from like a Catholic perspective, we're always like the target of being made fun of and controversy. And it just seems like one of the big religions in the news that's always people take pot shots at. And then something like this happens, and it's like all eyes. It's like everybody, every major news media organization, every major newspaper, everybody is like,
what's going to happen?
what's going to happen with the Catholic Church? What's going to happen with the Catholic
Yeah.
Church? And um, I have my own feelings on this last pope, and I'll try to remain as reserved as possible. But I do think that one of the things that has bothered me since he took power was the fact that the world has changed so much as far as social media is concerned. We've just embraced social media, and I feel like there was a lot of confusion during Pope Francis's time. And when I say confusion, he would make a statement, and you would have a lot of major news organizations that would run with said statement, and it felt like you really had to do a lot of research
Yep.
in order to pull apart what he was actually saying, because 99% of the time what was being reported as like a major headline, the Catholic Church changes their stance on this or changes their thoughts on this,
Yep.
just not true, right? Like,
You have to go and actually look up the words that came out of his mouth versus how it was twisted by the time it got to us. through the media.
exactly. Yeah. And I think from like a social media perspective, I just think it's a miss by the Vatican to really embrace and take advantage of that, because you have so many different avenues in which you can communicate to people. And I just think we do a very, very poor job from a Catholic perspective.
I'm not on Twitter. X. I'm not on X. Do you follow him on X?
I do.
That was
But-
fascinating to me when we were looking this up, that he has an X account, because I'm not on it. So I'm not watching that.
And I don't know who runs that.
He does. Or he did.
I doubt it.
But it's him communicating with one of his people to post for him.
Yeah.
I just saw something about he's like one of the first people to do that.
So you kind of took a point this time around as far as doing some of the research on this. I'm going to let you kick this off, and I will interject as we go on.
All right.
Does that work?
That works.
All right.
I like that. First thing that I looked up was the role of the Pope. So the Pope is the Bishop of Rome. As Catholics, we believe that he's the successor of St. Peter. I guess we don't just believe that. He is the successor of St. Peter and the head of the Catholic Church. There have been 266 popes, including Francis, since St. Peter. So St. Francis is number 266 since Peter the Apostle.
Wow.
And
It's interesting that he's considered a bishop of Rome. I would like to know a little bit more about that. That's interesting.
do you want to look anything up?
Well, I don't even know how you would begin to do some research on that, because why I'm confused, or even why I asked the question, is I thought it was like priest and then a bishop and then an archbishop and then a cardinal. And I don't know if there's like another higher ranking of cardinal, but I thought it went right from the cardinal to the pope, because I think the people that are currently being considered to become pope are cardinals, if not mistaken. So the pope is at the top with supreme authority, and below him it is as follows. So you've got the pope.
And then it says Bishop of Rome,
Yep.
then cardinals.
Senior clergy appointed by the pope, who often lead major dioceses or Vatican offices. They advise the pope and elect a new pope in a conclave, which will come up later. Archbishops, who oversee an archdiocese or a major diocese and have authority over suffragan bishops in their province. And so the bishops are leaders of individual dioceses. So they're responsible for teaching, governing, and sanctifying the faithful in their region. They report to their archbishop or directly to the pope in some cases. And then you have priests, of course, and then deacons. It is worth noting that Jesuits and Franciscans, and I'm sure Benedictines, have their own internal hierarchies, typically led by a superior general or provincial, but they operate under the broader church structure. So the Vatican also includes various councils, congregations, and tribunals that support governance. Then the question becomes, well, how do you become a Monsignor? So it's an honorary title, and it is conferred by the Pope on a priest recognizing distinguished service or contributions to the church. The title comes from the Italian Monsignor, meaning my lord, and is often used for priests who hold significant administrative or pastoral roles. Interesting.
That is interesting. Knew it was a more distinguished title, but I think I assumed that it came from your local bishop.
Well, there you go.
That it comes from the Pope. When I looked it up on my end, AI gives me a pyramid of heads. Do you see the same thing on your end?
No, huh?
It's like God at the top, and there's like a sun with clouds, and then the Pope's head, and then below that, the cardinals' heads, and so on and so on.
Are the cardinals
it's like
red?
the food pyramid, but with heads.
Like it.
Yes, the cardinals are wearing red hats. There's an unbroken line from St. Peter to the present Pope, and that will continue with the next one that's chosen. Also looked up what the Pope's role is. It's spiritual shepherd, global leader, moral voice, and unifier of the church.
Some of that is a little bit I struggle with just because, again, I go back to the confusion piece that I spoke about earlier, but there is, and I don't know if you found it in your research, but I believe if he sits at the throne of St. Peter and makes a statement, it is infallible versus the rest of the time he is fallible. I don't know if you knew that or not.
You definitely need to look that up because I feel like I've heard something like that, but no. Didn't know that was a for sure thing. What does that mean? That he's pondered it and conferred with other cardinals and people that work with him before he sits in that throne?
Well, I think it comes directly from God. I think that's what makes it so special.
Is that true?
Yeah. So the concept of papal infallibility in the Catholic Church holds that the Pope is preserved from error when he speaks in ex cathedra, right? And that's Latin for from the chair of St. Peter. And it's typically on matters of faith and morals, defining doctrine to be held by the universal church. That does not mean the Pope is infallible in all statements or actions, only under very specific conditions. So some key points about that. The Pope must be speaking officially as the supreme pastor and teacher of the church, invoking his authority from the chair of St. Peter. And the scope is the infallibility applies only to definitive teachings on faith or morals intended to bind the entire church, not personal opinions, disciplinary decisions, or non-doctrinal matters. So some conditions that have to be followed. The Pope must clearly intend to define a doctrine. The teaching must concern faith or morals, and it must be directed to the universal church. Papal infallibility was formally defined at the First Vatican Council between 1869 and 1870 in the document Pastor Eternus. It was a response to debates about the Pope's authority amid growing secularism and challenges to church unity. Rare instances have included, let's see here, Pope Pius IX's definition of the Immaculate Conception, which was in 1854, and then Pope Pius XII's definition of the Assumption of Mary in 1950.
What does that mean by exception? Like they said something on it and then they took it back?
What do you mean exception?
I thought you just read rare exceptions include...
Rare instances.
Oh, of what?
Rare instances where this, I guess, was invoked. So like when they spoke from...
Oh, so it's that rare? that it happens.
Yeah.
Did it ever happen during
Pope
our
Francis?
current? Yeah.
Let's see. So if I look at some very recent popes to have done this, right? Um, Pope John Paul II, for example, no definitive ex cathedra statements.
Wow.
Pope Benedict and Pope Francis, no, none of them. None of them did.
That's so interesting. I wonder who the last was.
It was Pope Pius XII.
Okay.
And the last universally acknowledged ex cathedra pronouncement was in 1950
Mm-hmm.
when Pius XII defined the dogma of the Assumption of Mary in the Apostolic Constitution Munificentissimus Deus.
It's an easy word.
He declared that Mary was assumed body and soul into heaven, a belief held by many Catholics but not formally defined until then.
Wow.
This is the only clear instance of an ex cathedra statement in the 20th or 21st centuries.
And you and I wouldn't know that because we've grown up since the 50s. Just
Yeah.
knowing that Mary was assumed into heaven, body and soul.
Makes sense,
That's
though,
interesting.
because since Vatican I defined papal infallibility, popes have used it very sparingly to avoid any kinds of controversy and maintain unity.
Yeah, that
So-
was when you initially brought that up, I was like, what? How often is this used?
Post Vatican II, popes emphasize collaboration with bishops and the broader church, reducing the need for unilateral infallible declarations.
Wow.
And most core Catholic beliefs have been defined, right? Leaving few issues requiring ex cathedra pronouncements.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, pretty wild. Not something that I would typically think, but there you have it. All right.
Always seems like there's more to learn.
So what about this pope that only served for 13 days? What's that about?
We'll find him. You have to tell me what that Roman numeral is because I never learned those either. Shortest one was Pope Urban VII.
So V is 5, II, so it's 7.
Okay. I'll learn Roman numerals through this process.
I have learned Roman numerals because that is how Final Fantasy titles all of their games. That is literally why
I just assumed you were a better Catholic.
Nope. That is literally why I have tied it to memory.
That's very funny.
So that would be 7.
So Pope Urban the VII, he was pope for a grand total of 13 days in 1590. This is the shortest. But then when I went to go look that up, there's actually other popes that were just days as well. He was healthy when he was elected, but then he suffered fevers and days later died of malaria. And that seems like a common theme around that time period for many different people. There's a list of the top 10 other shortest papacies, and it's all just a number of days or weeks as well. A few of the other interesting popes through history: St. Peter, obviously, being the first pope. He was an apostle, a fisherman, turned martyr, and he was crucified upside down in Rome. Pope Leo the Great, 5th century, persuaded Attila the Hun not to sack Rome. That feels like something you, as one of 5 boys, would have learned growing up. Pope Gregory the Great sent missionaries to England, reformed the liturgy, and was the origin of the Gregorian chant. Pope Urban II, I can do that Roman numeral, called the First Crusade in 1095 a turning point in church and world history. Pope John Paul II, who's now Saint Pope John Paul II, made a saint by Pope Francis, who just passed away. He was canonized by Pope Francis. Just thought that was an interesting fact.
Do you want to talk about how many people he canonized as saints? Because I've had this conversation like 15 times in the last week. And
the
everybody,
most of any pope.
Yeah.
900 and what? I have it in my research somewhere, but I don't have it right here.
It's like 918 or something. It's an insane number. And
Pope Francis canonized 900. Let me find how many.
my doctor, who was also Catholic, I told him this fact, and he goes, "What?" I said, "Yeah, it's over 900 people that he canonized as saints." And the big question to me is, I think it takes a very long time in order to canonize somebody as a saint, in order to recognize them
Correct.
at that stature. So to do
Have
that
to
for over
meet-
900 people is
They have-
bananas.
They have to meet a lot of criteria. 942 saints during his papacy, and he was pope for 12 years.
Wow.
So he really got to work.
Yeah.
I wonder how many were like in the hopper, ready to become
Ready to
saints when he.
get ready to get sainted.
Yes.
Nice.
So Pope John Paul II, who is now Saint Pope John Paul II, was the first non-Italian pope in 455 years, instrumental in the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. I have said he's a canonized saint. So I thought all this was interesting about Pope Francis, but do you want me to shorten it a little bit?
Just keep going.
Okay. So what makes Pope Francis different? His birth name was Jorge Mario Bergoglio.
Bergoglio. Yep.
Bergoglio. He was born December 17th, 1936 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He was 88 when he passed away. His papacy began March 13th, 2013, and he chose Francis as his papal name in honor of St. Francis of Assisi.
Papal.
What did I say?
Papal.
His papal name.
Papal.
Oh my gosh.
Papal.
It sounds like papal when I'm saying it. Papal.
Papal.
His papal name that he chose was St. Francis in honor of St. Francis of Assisi. And he's the first pope to use this name. I'm so tired. Papal.
Papal.
Pope Francis passed away on Easter Monday, April 21st, 2025. He died at his residence in the Vatican's Casa Santa Marta following a sudden stroke that led to irreversible cardiac arrest. His personal physician, Dr. Sergio Alfieri, reported that the Pope fell into a coma and passed away peacefully without suffering, surrounded by close aides and Cardinal Pietro Parolin. I'm just going to try my hand at all these names. Sorry for the people that are going, no, it's this way. Who recited the rosary at his bedside. How lovely is that? Despite recent health challenges, including a 5-week hospitalization for double pneumonia, as we talked about at the beginning,
Right.
Pope Francis had resumed limited public duties. He appeared in St. Peter's Square on Easter Sunday, the day before he died, delivering the traditional Ubri et Orbi. Is that anywhere correct? You want to say it better?
I don't know.
Blessing. Basically, he delivered a blessing on Easter Sunday, the day before he died, and visited a prison on Holy Thursday. So that would have been a couple days before he died to support inmates. His sudden passing shocked many, though his doctor affirmed there was nothing that could have been done to prevent it.
Like we said before, I mean, he seemed very sick. I think what's most shocking to me about the whole thing is that if you were kind of a fly on the wall, it looked to me like he was making some kind of recovery.
Yep.
So the most interesting thing about it, though, I think is what you just said. He appeared in St. Peter's Square on Easter Sunday, delivered the blessing, and then passed away on Easter Monday, which is just wild.
It is.
Like, if that's not divine, I don't know what is.
Yep, it is. We're talking about this the day after his funeral, too. So his funeral was Saturday, April 26th. Today's our recording days, the 27th. And today is Divine Mercy Sunday. I cannot even fathom the amount of people that have been praying for him, and just find that beautiful.
Yeah, it's a unification of people, and
that is what the Pope should do.
Well, this is a thing that I'm not sure that people really think about in context of the Pope passing away.
Yeah.
Is even though it's sad that he has passed away, and even though it is a big deal, I think one of the pieces that we don't often consider is it unifies the church in prayer. It unifies people together in prayer. And not just in the United States, but across the entirety of the globe. And that's a big deal, right?
Even people that don't pray have asked me, did you hear the Pope died? It's a big deal no matter what. It seems like it's interesting to watch people's reactions.
He was the 266th pontiff and the first from Latin America. His 12-year papacy was marked by humility and definitely a focus on the marginalized.
He's also the first Jesuit pope.
Yep. And
Jesuits are known for education, missionary work, and vows of poverty.
He chose his papal name Francis in honor of St. Francis of Assisi, and he is the first pope to use that name.
St. Francis was a 13th century Italian mystic, poet, and Catholic friar who founded the Franciscan order that you referenced earlier. He's known for his devotion to Jesus, his radical commitment to poverty. He inspired a movement emphasizing love, compassion, and service to others. He also deeply revered nature and all its creatures, a trait that has made him a patron saint of the environment and animals. He is said to even have preached to animals. I like that fact.
Yep. Always, anytime you ever see a picture of him, it's always St. Francis with all of the animals.
I always think of her sister-in-law.
Interestingly, before becoming a priest, he studied chemistry and worked as a bouncer. And he worked at a bouncer at a bar or nightclub, it sounds like, in Buenos Aires. So it was just a series of odd jobs that he held in his youth. It also sounds like he might have been a janitor at one point in his life and a literature teacher. But he joked that those experiences helped him understand people and develop patience. And that's probably integral to the roles he fell into later in life.
Yeah. One of the quotes was, "I was a bouncer in a club. Not a tough one, but I had to be firm. That helped me with the confessional later."
Trying to imagine this. I wish there were pictures somewhere of Pope Francis as a bouncer.
Yeah.
In his former life.
Maybe there are. I did see some people had created AI, him from a child to when he passed away. And there were AI versions of that. It was him as a chemist, him as a bouncer, all those things. And I thought that was funny.
It is kind of funny considering in the Righteous Gemstones, you have the John Goodman, who is kind of the patriarchal character of the family of these religious, almost like televangelist family.
Mm-hmm.
And in a past life, he was also kind of a enforcer or bouncer who is now reformed and tries to remain holy and smart in what he does.
Yep. It is funny.
Interesting.
Wonder what Pope Francis would think of you drawing that relation.
He probably would say, "Don't watch that show."
I thought it was interesting that Pope Francis chose to live in Casa Santa Marta. It's a guest house instead of the typical apostolic palace. He's not the first to do that, but his reasons for living in Casa Santa Marta instead of the apostolic palace was that he wanted to live in community, not in isolation. He desired a simpler, humbler lifestyle that reflects his values and those of St. Francis of Assisi. And he preferred daily interaction with people, often ate meals in the common dining room. And Pope Francis said, I need to live among people. If I lived alone or isolated, it wouldn't be good for me. Thought that was interesting too. I wonder if the apostolic palace is more secluded, if it truly is.
Also sounds like there's something to suggest that he drove a small car, but I thought that all popes were in the Pope-mobile. I thought that was a...
Pope-mobile is a tiny little car.
Yeah, but does that mean he drove a little bulletproof car around?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Little guy.
Doesn't look like it. I don't think so.
I
don't think he is a little guy.
No, I was saying the car's a little guy.
Oh.
Look up what his car looked like in relation to others.
I just want to know how tall he was. 5'9".
Pope-mobile. Sounds like previous popes have sometimes chosen more luxury cars, and he always opted for ones that could be more modest.
Yeah, and I mean, I think popes in the past have also worn, what is it, Prada?
Oh, yeah. There was something about his slippers.
And he did not.
In here. Didn't he choose different slippers? Like
I mean,
they're not necessarily a name brand kind of. His little red slippers.
Even if you take a look at the picture of him in the coffin, or in the open casket, rather.
Yeah.
He's wearing, very, scuffed up. They almost just look like normal, work shoes.
That's so interesting.
I don't want to say sneakers, but just, scuffed up shoes. Like, he really chose to avoid any kind of luxury. And I tip my hat to that, because there is something to be said about living in some type of poverty, or at least giving up maybe some of the more luxurious pieces of what he could have had during his time as Pope.
Yeah, in general, that is admirable.
So some interesting quotes that I pulled from Pope Francis. God never tires of forgiving us. We are the ones who tire of seeking his mercy. And I thought that was a nice quote, just because we always have the opportunity to go to confession and seek forgiveness for sins. And it's important to know that God never tires of forgiving us. Now, obviously, we should want to make a clean confession, and we should want to really embrace the idea of that. But it is us as people who are fallible human beings who often decide to go down a different path.
Yeah.
But God is always standing there with open arms for us. And I think that that's kind of how I see that quote.
We forget the open arms part. I think that we get stuck in our stuff, or any kind of thing we see as a sin, and we think God's not going to forgive us for X, Y, and Z.
Right.
I like that quote for that reason too.
The media only writes about the sinners and the scandals, but that's normal, because a tree that falls makes more noise than a forest that grows.
I think that's funny in relation to how you were talking about how things get misquoted from him. He must have been feeling it.
Like I said, I think over the last decade, 2 decades, just the amount of social media that has taken center stage. You say something and then people run with it, regardless of whether it's right or wrong, and can cause a lot of confusion. And with the Catholic Church, where we very strongly believe in the catechism, it's very easy for, oh my gosh, Pope Francis is changing the way that Catholics believe in this. And it's just not true.
Yeah.
I like this last one quite a bit too. I prefer a church which is bruised hurting and dirty because it has been out on the streets rather than a church, which is unhealthy from being confined and from clinging to its own security. And I think what's interesting about that is, regardless of what you think about the Catholic Church, it has remained unchanged since its inception.
Mm-hmm.
And considering the fact that we live in a country that is, what, a little over 200 years old, and look at how crazy the United States has changed, like over that period of time.
Yeah.
And yet you look at something like the Catholic Church and it really has not changed. It's kind of withstood the test of time and withstood all of the obstacles and barriers around it.
Yeah. There's so many parts of it too that are like trying to get out in the streets and dirty and help and make change for the better.
Yeah.
And it also seems like whether you agree or disagree with certain things that the Pope actually said, that is a admirable way to try to put yourself out there and try to make change versus just go along with the status quo.
The other piece here, and the piece that I keep getting into conversations with, and part of the reason I'm glad that we're talking about this, is the period that we're kind of in now. It's weird, right? So the Catholic Church has very specific ways in which they kind of go through the passing of somebody of this stature. And there's a 9-day mourning period, and the way in which you pronounce this word that basically describes that is, I believe it's Novendeus, and the etymology is, I believe noven comes from the Latin novum, which means 9, dies, which means day, and then alias, so Novendalius.
Quite the word.
I know.
I also did not know that was a thing that we did after a pope passes away, because I would have been a lot younger the last time this happened. So I was like, okay, I need to pay attention now so that I actually learn something this time around. What happens? So I immediately looked that up the day that the Pope died. Like, what happens now? How do they choose the next one?
Well, it's interesting to me because when Pope Francis became Pope, I specifically remember I was actually working at St. Benedict Press at the time. And so there was a lot of focus around it. I just think it's been that long that I have just forgotten all of the different things that kind of surround the process, right?
Yeah.
So in some ways, it's almost like kind of seeing it all again for the first time. But yeah, it's a 9-day mourning period, and it is a long-standing tradition within the Catholic Church. And this goes all the way back to like ancient Roman customs. And the ancient Romans observed a 9-day funeral rite for significant figures. And then it was kind of adopted by early Christians and then formalized for papal mourning. It begins on the day of the Pope's funeral and includes 9 consecutive days of masses for the repose of his soul. And so for Pope Francis, his funeral occurred on April 26th, 2025. This period of mourning started on that day and will continue until May 4th, 2025.
Hopefully the day that we release this episode.
Right. But the period is also marked by public viewings. And so if you were in the Vatican, I guess mourners are allowed to pay their respects.
And the part that you had in there too was that each day of mass is presided over by a different cardinal.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
It's also a big deal, right?
Yeah. And I'm sure that the homily or the thing that they talk about at each mass is fascinating to listen to as well.
So, following the Pope's funeral, the church enters the sede vacante, otherwise known as the vacant see. And that is a period governed by the College of Cardinals, and they're led by Cardinal Carmelengo, Camerlengo. So, for Pope Francis, buried at the Basilica of St. Mary Major on April 26th, the next steps involve preparing for the conclave, and that's the formal gathering to elect a successor.
Gathering of those cardinals we've been talking about.
Right. So that typically begins 2 to 3 weeks after the funeral, allowing time for mourning and for the cardinals to travel to Rome. And so only cardinals under 80 years old are eligible to vote. The United States could take a lesson there. With 135 current eligible and slight deviation from the usual cap of 120 due to recent appointments. The process occurs in the Sistine Chapel, where cardinals take an oath of secrecy and engage in secret ballots. Each ballot requires a 2/3 majority, 90 votes, to elect a new pope, and voting continues until this threshold is met, with black smoke signaling no decision and white smoke announcing success. Once elected, the new pope accepts the office, chooses a papal name, and is announced to the world from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica with the proclamation, Habemus Papum, i.e., we have a new pope. The role of the cardinals is crucial, as they not only vote but also govern the church during the interregnum, ensuring continuity and stability, right? So that is kind of the process here that we're in the middle of.
Did I see something also that he has helped elect a lot of the current cardinals too? Is elect the correct word?
Very likely. And I know
So-
that's caused a lot of controversy as well.
Of who will be the next one? Will it be someone similar to similar to Pope Francis, or any different? That's fascinating to me. It'll be interesting to see. As Catholics, we are also called to pray for that process as well, not just the period of mourning and pray for Pope Francis. We are also called to pray for the cardinals that are going to make that decision.
Right.
So,
yeah, I think it's regardless of what happens, I think we always just have to recognize that from a Catholic perspective, God is in control of whatever is going to happen. And these people just need to pray that his will be done and that whatever happens,
the hearts and minds of the cardinals listen to him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's what it comes down to, right? Because regardless of anything, like, we are all still human beings and fallible human beings. So we just pray that the process is following God's will.
Yes. Other thing I was interested in, is it always a cardinal that they pick?
Oh, versus like a bishop or an archbishop?
Like anyone, like, does it always have to be a cardinal? Like, that occurred to me as well, because it's cardinals getting together.
I assume so.
It looked like it has been since 13 something, but I wondered what, like, before that, what are we going down a rabbit hole? But like, EWTN has something about who can be pope. But that's interesting to me too.
I don't think that you would go from a bishop to I don't think so.
It's just an interesting fact to me. Like, it logically makes sense that you would pick one of the cardinals, and then how does that process actually work? So they go into a room, all of them, and is there like a piece of paper that's passed around with every single person's name and each person like circles? I am so fascinated by all of that.
I think a lot of it is kind of in secrecy, if not mistaken.
And I'm sure there's not a lot of time to like hang out with each other, but what's that like? Like when you're passing each other in the hall, like when you're not in that room, trying to figure that out very seriously in the in-between time. You like make sure that you don't step on someone's toes, literally. Like, oh, they're not going to circle my name anymore.
Well, I do
Just
often
kidding.
wonder if they're even allowed to speak to one another while that process is
I
going on.
know.
I wonder if they do.
What is that like?
Yeah.
And maybe because it's so secretive, we don't have something on that. But I wonder if there is something on that.
With the opening of the conclave, cardinals swear an oath of secrecy, promising not to reveal details of the proceedings, under penalty of excommunication, which is huge. All non-essential personnel leave after the command extra omnis, which means everyone out, leaving only voting cardinals and a few authorized staff, like confessors or doctors.
Everyone out. It reminds me of Disney when you're
So
on the Haunted Mansion ride. They say, get out.
voting occurs in scrutinies or ballots, and typically 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon each day. Cardinals write a name on a ballot, fold it, and place it in a chalice. Ballots are counted and burned after each session.
Oh, so they start off just with one name,
Mm-hmm.
like right off the bat
I think so.
at 2:00 in the morning? Is that
Yep.
what you said?
Yeah, so it occurs, the voting occurs at 2 in the morning and then 2 in the afternoon each day.
Oh,
So twice a day.
what? Why 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon?
If no pope is elected after a set number of ballots, usually 30 to 34 depending on rules, cardinals may shift to a runoff between the top 2 candidates or require only a simple majority, which is very rare and depends on the governing apostolic constitution. During the day, right? So every day while this is going on,
Mm-hmm.
cardinals stay in the Domus Sanctae Marthae, and that is the Vatican guest house, but are isolated from the outside world. So they attend Mass, pray, and reflect between voting sessions.
Who says mass? I have so many questions.
Smoke from burning ballots signals progress. We already talked about this.
Mm-hmm.
Once a candidate achieves the required majority, he is asked if he accepts the election. If he does, he chooses his papal name. The new pope is announced to the world with, we have a pope from the St. Peter's Basilica. Let's see here. Are people allowed to speak to one another? Yes, cardinals are allowed to speak to one another during the conclave, but with strict limitations to maintain the integrity of the process. So, they can and do discuss candidates, their merits, and the needs of the church during designated breaks or in the Domus Sanctae Marthae. These conversations are critical for discerning the best candidates. Before the conclave officially begins, cardinals hold general congregations, meetings open to all cardinals, including non-voters over 80. This is crazy.
Wow.
These allow open discussion about the state of the church and potential candidates, though explicit campaigning is frowned upon.
I'll give you a brownie if you vote for me.
Let's see. There are restrictions on communication. So, firstly, cardinals are forbidden from discussing the conclave's proceeding with outsiders or revealing details, even after the conclave ends, under the oath of secrecy.
Mm-hmm.
No external communication is allowed, so that includes phones, letters, or the internet. Cardinals cannot receive consult with advisors or receive outside input. No campaigning. So while cardinals can advocate for a candidate, overt campaigning or forming factions is discouraged and considered contrary to the spiritual nature of the process. The 1996 Apostolic Constitution, Universi Dominici Gregos bans simony, which means vote buying or prearranged agreements. And so during meals, prayers, breaks, cardinals can interact, fostering informal exchanges that can influence votes. For example, a cardinal's reputation or demeanor during these moments may sway opinions.
Mm.
Limited staff, right? Like we talked about before, so cooks, doctors, etc., are present but sworn to secrecy and have minimal interaction with the cardinals beyond their duties.
Man, if I was making food, like each person that I like, I picture it like a cafeteria line, but it's probably not like that. I don't know. Each person that I interacted with, I would be like, oh, I could be talking to the next pope.
Yeah, I
Make
mean,
me so
it's.
curious.
I think that's kind of the wild thing, right? It's got to be one of the
Weirdest
cardinals that's.
experiences. I saw something that said that in the past it could take months or years to elect a pope, but since 1900, no conclave has lasted longer than 4 days since 1900. But like it makes sense that it could take years if everybody was traveling by like
Boat.
horse and buggy and yeah. Boat.
So, as of April 2025, there are 252 cardinals. 135 of them are under 80. So, 108 appointed by Pope Francis, 22 appointed by Pope Benedict the 16th, and 5 appointed by Pope John Paul II. And I think that makes up the 135 under 80, not the 252 number.
That's a lot of cardinals.
Some notable cardinals considered papable. Some notable considered papable.
Papable?
Right, like they could become the Pope.
Not palpable?
Probably gonna murder these names, so I apologize. But Fridolin Bongo, he's 65 and he's from the Republic of Congo.
Mm-hmm.
Jean-Marc Avelain, 66, and he is of France, and he's currently the Archbishop of Marseille. Peter Erdo, he's 72, and he's from Hungary. He's the Archbishop of Budapest. Pietro Parolin, he's 70, and he is the Vatican Secretary of State in Italy. So very close to home for him.
Very interesting.
Pier Battista Pizzaballa, 60. He's of Italy, of course. Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Luis Antonio Tagle, 67. He's of the Philippines, and he's the Vatican Evangelization Chief. Peter Turkson, 76. He's from Ghana, and he's the Vatican official and diplomat. And then Matteo Zuppi, 69, of Italy, and he's the Archbishop of Bologna.
Why do they pick those people as possible?
Just probably like the influence of the current pope and folks that are
vocal, and everybody would have heard something from them.
Yeah, I mean, they're prominent cardinals and they're under 80. So frequently mentioned in the media and Vatican analysis as a potential successor. So take that as you will. I mean, it could be none of those folks, right? It could be, because I think that was part of the shock of Pope Francis, if memory serves me correctly, was that he was like way down on the list. Yeah. And nobody even thought that he would become Pope.
I remember that.
And then all of a sudden it was like, whoa.
Wow. I remember there being something, but I didn't know it was that.
Yeah, there's other potential candidates too. I think what I was trying to figure out is if there were any that, some of these folks lean more towards like a more conservative uh, political spectrum, so to speak, and then some are more liberal in their teachings and the way in which they want to take things. So I'm really curious to see which direction they kind of lean. Um, does look like there is a potential candidate from the USA, and it's Raymond Burke, and he's the former prefect of the Apostolic Signatura. But yeah,
It's
so
interesting that they can't talk about it after the fact, too.
so while any male Catholic could be chosen, the conclave structure makes a cardinal elector the likely outcome. The 2025 conclave shaped by Francis's diverse appointments may produce a non-European or progressive pope, but conservative and European influences remain strong. And I think sometimes as somebody who is like very involved and loves politics, you have to kind of look through that sometimes just to see like where is God's hand in all of this.
I'm thinking of the parallels between politics, too. Like,
It's hard not to.
person that's usually picked, and then currently in the US, our president is not the typical pick and
Right.
wasn't the first time around either. I did like that one of the things that popped up when I was looking at Pope Francis. I don't know why I keep stuttering over his name. Pope Francis was that he embodied both continuity and change. I would think that would be the same for every pope, but it seems to be maybe just because we're of a certain age to be aware.
Mm-hmm. That is all I got. Is there anything else you want to share about the Pope and where we're going?
It's amazing that this has been a process for 2,000 years.
Isn't it?
Yep. Absolutely amazing. Did also want to thank anyone listening for the awesome 5-star reviews that we've received on Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, thank you for continuing to listen. And if you like what you hear, it would mean a lot to us if you would share. Share with others. That's all that we ask.
Yes. From the conclave of fans out there.
Or if you want to hear us talk about something specific, you can always send us an email.
Comment or email.
Right. It's something about Catholics@gmail.com, right?
Yep.
There you go.
It is. We would love to hear from you. Share us. Follow us. Love us.
As we love you.